Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023. We are in the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 9. Let's start in verse 1. David asked, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They called him to appear before David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "Your servant," he replied. The king asked, "Is there no one left of the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?" Ziba answered the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. Ziba answered, "He is at the house of Machir, son of Ammiel, in Lo-debar." So King David had him brought from the Lo-debar, from the house of Machir, son of Ammiel. David is an honorable man. In the wars of that day, a king that had overthrown or deposed the previous regime would be expected to go in and kill every male in the previous king's family. And Ziba probably worried that he was being called in, summoned for that, summoned to, because sometimes they would even kill all the male servants, leave not just relatives, kill just the relatives, kill every male from the household, slaves and everything. Bloodthirsty lot. David was a man after God's own heart. He wanted to fulfill his vows he made to Jonathan. He had 300 eyewitnesses, some of his most prominent people in his army had been witnesses to the second set of promises. And they might have felt a little odd about it, but gone, that's the way of the world. David could have gone away with it, except God knew, and David knew. But David had been genuine in trying into promising Jonathan, that he would protect his family. And he wanted to honor Saul's family. He did not want to be vindictive. God put him there, and he knew it. David knew that he had not put himself in the kingship, that God had done it. And that God had done it in his own timing, and that God had done it in such a way that David had stayed moral. So he wanted to honor his promises he made to Jonathan. And he had to make some inquiry. None of his servants knew of any living relatives of Saul, but they knew of a servant who might know, and so he was called in. And Ziba, the man, was called in, and he's in front of David, and he's probably worried about, am I going to be executed for being Saul's servant? And he's probably somewhat relieved to find out all he wants to know is there anybody left in Saul's house? And he's going to call them in. Okay, well, gets me off the hook. I can get in good with him, give him the information. And David then calls in this son of Jonathan. Now, David knows what he's going to do. He's going to bless Jonathan's son. He doesn't know the history. He doesn't know why he's there. But Ziba tries to paint a sympathetic picture because, if he's crippled, David might spare him because there's no chance he would become king and threaten David. Ziba is trying to be loyal to Saul and loyal to David and loyal to his country and save his own neck And he's not giving any names, you notice. He just names where he lives. And so David has to send for him there and have him brought back. Verse 6, when Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, Mephibosheth, your servant, he replied. Don't be afraid, David said to him, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. So David is bestowing on him a great honor. He's making sure he has economic justice, that he will be a wealthy man all his life, whether he works the land, whether he works or not. Well, he's crippled, he can't work. And he will eat at David's table. Eating at David's table was an honor reserved for important people. His sons did, family did, generals did. We know from having gone through Saul, David sat there some of the time, and Saul's generals ate at the table of Saul. And so, it was the people who eat with the king are important to the kingdom. They're honored. They generally have important places of some sort of important political role in the kingdom. They make decisions, they lead people, they do duties that the king requires, they give advice to the king. Well, in this case, Mephibosheth can do nothing for David, but David honors him by basically providing all his needs all his life and giving him a seat at the table so he can bring another perspective to the dinner place conversation with King. David is giving him the honor he would have given Jonathan if Jonathan had still lived. And Mephibosheth is probably just flatly blown away. He's not expecting this kind of thing. He's expecting to have to plead for his life or defend his honor or defend his family. Instead, he's given this blessing that David would rather have given Jonathan, but Jonathan died doing his job, being a warrior on the battlefield, and David can't honor Jonathan anymore. It's already happened, and he cannot do that. So he's honoring Mephibosheth, the only surviving son of Jonathan, and basically letting him inherit his father's position. This was unheard of in that day and time. Giving that kind of honor, that kind of grace, that kind of bestowing of honor on the outgoing royal family was just unheard of. When this would have been told through the kingdom, people would have known that David was a righteous, just king and not vengeful. They would have known that he is somebody who expects fairness and justice, not just a well-ordered society, but one in which everybody has equal rights, whether you're Saul's family or David's family. They would have heard David being a leader who supported everybody, who led everybody, who wanted everybody to have a good time, a chance of good living. and that he restores to Mephibosheth all of Saul's property when all of Saul's family had died and somebody else had to take in Mephibosheth because he was a boy. Basically, the property either got unused or just other people moved into it and started using it and had treated it like their own. If Saul's clan was the one that had come in and grabbed it up, they were keeping it in the clan. But the thing is, even in clan justice, in the clannish society, they were supposed to do it in Mephibosheth's name and give him the proceeds from the land. They had apparently decided to keep it for themselves and split it up within the clan and let somebody else support him. This Machir, the son of Amiel. He was the one keeping Mephibosheth. We don't really know who he was related to Mephibosheth. He may have been somebody related to Mephibosheth's mother or nursemaid. He may, it may have been the mother's clan or the nursemaid's clan that was keeping Mephibosheth. But Saul's clan should have been keeping him. And that would have been legitimate in the views of most people. Instead, they moved on and go, well, let's at least keep the land. Or squatters had moved in. We really don't know who was keeping the land. And there was probably plenty of people that would go occupy unoccupied land and farm it and live in the houses and squat in it and make a living. And David then has the land restored back to Mephibosheth that he should have inherited. Verse 8, Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, "I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson may be provided for, and Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Ziba was actually a fairly wealthy man. To have 15 sons, he probably had multiple wives, which means he directly had to have enough money to support that many wives, and had 15 sons. On average, he'd have close to 15 daughters. And so he has a large family. And because he has a large family, he has some wealth. He also had managed to acquire 20 servants. For a single farmer, that's a fairly large retinue. So he had equivalent of 35 people working for him. That's a decent sized company in this day and time. And they're working full time for him. You understand, there's no part time work in that day and time. They're working full time for him. Plus all the women that those would have. So the servants, if they had a wife, if they had children, his sons, if they had wives and children, they would all be working for Ziba. So he has a fairly large company. And now he's been given Saul's land and said, work it for Mephibosheth and bring in the produce. The implication is the profit of the land goes to Mephibosheth. But, of course, Ziba is the one that determines what's profit. He can use the proceeds from that land to support himself and his 15 sons and their families and his 20 servants and their families. So he can use his own land plus Saul's land, and he has to bring in to Mephibosheth something. But Mephibosheth himself is going to eat at David's table, so he's not going to be a drain on Ziba. Only Mephibosheth's family might have any claim to the produce of the land. So Ziba's been given a good deal too. The other thing I want to point out is Mephibosheth had the proper attitude. He was expecting to be killed, and he was wondering why you would honor me, a dead dog like that. The idiom dead dog in Hebrew is a idiom of I'm the lowest of the low, or that's the lowest of the low. The dog was one of the lowest viewed creatures in Hebrew society. Nobody kept a dog as a pet. They were viewed as just a little above being evil. Yeah, they came around and they ate scraps and kept other vermin down, and they ate rats that ate your grain and mice and things like that. But they also carried rabies, they attacked people, they would, you know, be an impediment to getting around. They were not viewed as something that was beneficial to society. And so a dog was a negative connotation. And then when one died, well, they weren't clean animals either. So you couldn't eat them. And once they died, they were even more so in that they were now a source of corruption. And anybody who dragged it out and got rid of it was unclean and had to take a bath and be unclean till evening. And it was work to take care of it. Here's this useless animal that is borderline, well, it's an unclean animal and it's nasty, and if it dies, then it's a detriment to everybody. Whether you leave it there or you clean up that spot of land and take care of the issue. So a dead dog was kind of the lowest of the low. You couldn't get any lower than that. And Mephibosheth is saying, hey, I'm that dead dog. Why are you honoring me like this? He's kind of saying, hey, I was content to just be a freeloader in a nobody's house where I used to live. Why are you honoring me by letting me be an advisor to the king? And David doesn't respond because he's honoring Jonathan. And see, Mephibosheth does not know that David and his father had an agreement with each other, a covenant with each other. David could have just been wily and, said, oh, congratulations, you get your grandfather's land back and your grandfather's servant's going to help provide for you, and left it at that. And even the men that knew he and Jonathan had an agreement would have thought, oh, David's fulfilled it. David doesn't do that. David honors it in a way that honors Jonathan greatly. And he doesn't follow the social norms. He follows what's just and right and righteous. Verse 11. Then Ziba said to the king, your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table, and he was crippled in both feet. So Micah gets to go back to his great-grandfather's land, and Ziba, the servant of Saul, gets to farm it and basically raise Micah and teach him how to control his own property because ultimately he's going to inherit his father's property. And Mephibosheth, he's provided for the rest of his life. And eating at the king's table is not just you get, 3 meals a day. You get housing, you get clothing. If you have any other needs, if he, needed to write a letter, he would be provided with ink and writing materials, or even a scribe if he couldn't write himself. If he needed to be taken across town to go do some business, somebody would take him across town. He was going to be a member of David's household, just like he was his own son. And all the benefits that a prince under David would have gotten, he would have gotten. And so Mephibosheth has a life of luxury after that, comparatively. And his son gets to then be raised by somebody who's farming the land and able to teach him how to do it. Dad wouldn't have been able to. He couldn't do it. And Ziba would then have been a caretaker to Micah and teaching him how to farm the land so that when his dad died, he would be able to be the farmer of the land and be able to take care of the land and make a living. So David provided for the family not just a little bit, in abundance. The man that was going to be hard to keep came to the palace. Everybody that would be able-bodied got to go to the farm. David was a man after God's own heart. And he didn't just barely meet the requirements of the covenant between him and Jonathan. He actively fulfilled them like Jonathan was still alive. Holy Father, help us to be that kind of noble, appropriate people, that we won't just barely fulfill the requirements of the law, of the customs, but that we will love people generously, that we will love actively, that we will be generous in our grace and love, that people will see your Spirit in us, that we will be seen as people who care for people, love people, and benefit others, that we will be a benefit to people around us. Not somebody who is a pushover and people get to use, but people who are wise and discerning and still do what is above and beyond. That we can be generous because we've been faithful to shepherd our resources, so we can be generous. Lord, I ask that you bless this coming week. Have us to follow your will. Have us to wisely think through, that we would have good relations with everybody we know. In your holy name, amen. I am your host, Frank Reich, Associate Pastor at Family and Ministry at Grace Fellowship Baptist Church. And this has been recorded on Sunday, March 19th, 2023. I hope to see you Wednesday at church. If not, I hope to see you Sunday at church. If not, we'll be here on YouTube every week. You have a blessed week.